Hi, this is Mr. Phillips, and I would like to talk to you about the PS2 CER Summative Assessment for Kinetic Energy and Mass. Whenever you do a CER, there are several things you need to do before you even begin. One of which is to take a look at the statement or the question that you are supposed to be responding to. In this case, the statement says, make a claim about the relationship between kinetic energy and the mass based on the provided data. So this is data that we have based off one of the labs you did for activity 2.2, one of the parts. And in this lab activity, the scenario was you dropped a 170 gram can and a 425 gram can from a height of 30 centimeters as measured from the bottom of the can onto a ball of Play-Doh, and you measure the ball of Play-Doh before the drop and after the drop, and then you figure out the amount of squish. So down here in our data table, we can see that the 170 gram can had the amount of squish of 3 millimeters overall, as dropped from 30 centimeters up. The heavy can, on the other hand, the 425 gram can, had a squish of 7 millimeters overall, as a result of a drop from 30 centimeters onto the ball of Play-Doh. So we need to make a claim based on this information. The claim that we're looking at is right here. So make a claim about the relationship between kinetic energy and mass based on the provided data. Well, when I look at this information, to me, it looks like my claim would be something to the effect of the kinetic energy of an object increases as the mass increases as long as the speed remains constant. Now I have to make sure I have that other part in there about the speed, because I didn't change the speed, I simply changed the mass of the can. So again, my claim would be the kinetic energy of an object increases as the mass increases as long as the speed remains constant. So now that I have my claim, I want to copy my claim, highlight it, copy it, and paste it into my evidence. And I also want to paste my claim into my reasoning statement in two places, once at the beginning and then once at the end, so I can use it as the beginning and the end of my reasoning statement. Now for my evidence, before I write that up, I want to look at my scientific principles. So I have 5 scientific principles, and when I look at these, based on what I'm supposed to be writing about, kinetic energy and mass, the one that jumps out at me as being the most important one would be number 3. So scientific principle number 3 says an object's kinetic energy increases as its mass increases as long as the speed stays constant. Well, that's pretty much what I have as my claim, because that's what we've talked about in class, that's what we demonstrated. So I'm going to use scientific principle number 3. I don't need 1, 2, 4, or 5. Number 1, I could work it in if I want to do a lot of extra writing, but it's implied in number 3 that the objects are moving, and we talked about that with our backup statement there at the beginning for our background information, so I really don't need to include number 1 in there. So I'm just using scientific principle number 3. So my evidence, I restated my claim, because that's what I should do so I know what I'm writing towards. And then I said, activity 2.2 data table shows that as the mass of the can increased from 170 grams to 425 grams, so I scroll up here, I did 170 to 425 grams, the amount of squish increased from 3 millimeters to 7 millimeters, which is what it shows me right over here, respectively, indicating a 4 millimeter change when the mass of the can increased. So I always want to make sure I'm including my quantitative data in my CER when I have it available. I also went on to say mass was a factor in the amount of squish. The mass was not constant because a 170 gram can was used for some data, while a 425 gram can was used for other data. And as a result of switching the cans, I had more squish. The more squish relates to the amount of kinetic energy. So the bigger the squish factor, the bigger the amount of kinetic energy that was there. The increase in squish was due to an increase of mass and KE, while the speed remained constant as the cans were both dropped from the same height of 30 centimeters as measured from the bottom of the can. So now I've got my evidence. So my next step is to go down and do my reasoning statement. Okay? So with my reasoning statement, I've already copied and pasted my claim in there. That's my first statement. So my claim was the kinetic energy of an object increases as the mass increases as long as the speed remains constant. So I have that. The next thing I always like to do is I always like to put in my scientific principle next. And so we said that scientific principle number 3 was the winner. It's the one that relates to what we're writing about in this CER. And so we always want to remember to include the scientific principle number and the restating of the principle. So right after my claim, I'm going to put Scientific principle 3 states that an object's kinetic energy increases as its mass increases as long as the speed stays constant. The next step I do is I just go up and copy my evidence. I'm not going to read that over again because I already told you what I wrote for evidence. So I'm going to copy my evidence from above, paste that right after my scientific principle. And then my last statement is just my claim again, which I've already pasted in there. But what I want to do in front of that is I just want to put the word therefore, a comma. And so my final statement will be, therefore, the kinetic energy of an object increases as the mass increases, as long as the speed remains constant. And that should help you understand how to write the CER for the summative assessment for kinetic energy and mass. Thank you.